Hey guys, it's me, Stormie, and today I am going to talk to you about the hemispheres. Now, there's hemispheres and quadrants. We'll cover quadrants in another video, but for this one, we're going to talk about the hemispheres. And I think that they're important to understand because they add another layer of your astrology knowledge. They give you another way to look a little bit more in depth. And even if you're a beginner, you can start to look and say, oh, look, wow, this person or my chart has 8 planets in the southern hemisphere. What does that show me? Right? So we're going to talk about that today. So what you're looking at right now is actually a division of both the hemispheres and the quadrants. The quadrants sit inside of here, first, second, third, and fourth, and the hemispheres are the north, south, east, and west. Now your northern and southern hemispheres are going to get divided. They get split in half, right? By the horizon, okay? And the eastern and western hemispheres get divided by the meridian. So first things first, I want to talk about the horizon because this is usually where people get a little bit left. They get messed up. So on a typical chart, we know that the ascendant sets right here, okay, to the right, to that first house space right there. And so it's going to appear right there to the left. I said right, but it appears to the left. Sorry about that. Now, the horizon starts right here at 9 o'clock, if we imagine this as a clock, and it extends to the west over here at 3 o'clock. So the 3 o'clock position is the west. And if you think about this, this makes a lot of sense because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, right? Now, if you've got that, pay attention for just a second, because the other thing that tends to happen with people is that they think immediately when they look at a chart that the northern hemisphere is at the top, but that's not correct. The northern half of the chart is actually at the bottom, as you can see down here. And think about that. Think about the movement. The sun has to rise in the east, right? So it's got to go around, and then it sets in the west, okay? Now, that's just a little bit about what this layout actually looks like, but I want to talk to you about each of the individual hemispheres for just a second. Now, each hemisphere has its own influence on the chart, okay? So the northern hemisphere is going to be and have a lot of introverted emphasis, whereas the southern hemisphere up here, right, this is like where we're meeting people at the level of the world. We're very extroverted up here. So it also is going to show us a lot about how people interact out in public, whereas in the eastern hemisphere, what drives a person is going to be over here. Why are they doing what they're doing? And in the western hemisphere, this is what pushes them to do what they're doing. They're getting a little bit of force right behind them to get their high knees in gear. Now, one other thing that I will point out before I move on and start talking about these hemispheres is the fact that you see within each hemisphere, it actually has 6 houses, okay? See that? So it's going to have these 6 houses in one way, shape, or form. And that's not going to be the same when we get to quadrants, so we'll talk about that. But let's start at the bottom of the chart and let's talk about the northern hemisphere, all the goodies that are hanging out down there, okay? So this is actually in the northern hemisphere going to be houses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 right here, northern hemisphere. It's very exciting. So the northern hemisphere is about the self and me and the self evolution, right? Like evolving in that self is the primary goal for this individual. This also is going to be in thriving and growing in that self and growing in a very personal, internal way. It's going to also fulfill the emotions from the inside out. That's what the strive is here. We've got to learn to feel the emotions from the inside out. Now, what do we see here? This person is usually going to strive to balance creativity with reliance, but this happens in a pretty introverted way, right? Like this is not a completely extroverted placement at all. That's not what this hemisphere is about. It's very quiet, it's very internal, and it's very personal, and it is about the self. Now, when we look at the southern hemisphere and we get to these 6 up here, so we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 up here. This is a social space, right? Like we're out in public here, a lot more extroverted. So the social and other people processes in life lie right here. So this individual is going to tend to value the opinions of others, and sometimes means disregards the opinion of themselves. And in some ways it is similar to the Northern Hemisphere because it does strive to create this balance of creativity and reliance, but this is in a very extroverted way. This is not in an internal way. This is where we can start to see a little bit more codependence as opposed to superior independence, right? Now let's hop over here and look at the Eastern Hemisphere. So on the eastern side, which houses do we see? 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, and 3. Now the Eastern Hemisphere is self-reliance and motivation. That's the mix that we see here, right? So there's a considerable drive or a force or a reason behind what they're doing right here. They're comfortable working with others and doing a project alone, right? That's what the split of this can be. They're like, yeah, I can work with you because we have the social houses right up here, right? Or I can really be by myself. Either way, they're totally good. But what happens is the balance that we're working on here when we're looking into this Eastern Hemisphere is striving to balance that place of self with others. So we're not, so that there is a boundary there. It's not always all you, always all group. There's also some me time in there. When we're looking at the Western Hemisphere, we're going to see houses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 over here, okay? This is, when I look at the Western Hemisphere, I'm like, this is our ultimate like team player attitude. But this is also, they can be such a team player on this side as well that they completely lose themselves. They lose connections on this side with their individuality because they want to compromise, and it's kind of people-pleasing energy. So in this side of the hemisphere, what we're going to see is people tend to need other people around them to motivate them before they actually start something. Starting action, initiating is not always common here. They may need a little bit of help, right? And very similar to the Eastern Hemisphere, they're going to strive for that balance between others and self here. So it's really interesting when we add these elements into what we're looking at in our own charts or into the chart of somebody else that we're working on. I can tell you in my own personal chart, I have a stellium that's happening in my Northern Hemisphere, and I am always trying to balance, superiorly balance my creativity with my reliance, because it's my self-reliance, because I actually get very quiet about a new idea that I have before I'm willing to ask people for a lot of help and actually start to get it out there. And if you look at your own chart, you can see in some of these areas, especially, let's say you have 8 planets in just the Southern Hemisphere. That's going to give you a different spin on your chart than if you were just looking at, maybe you have 2 planets in the Northern Hemisphere. So take a look at your chart, see what you can acknowledge and recognize based on your hemispheres of your chart. And I'd love to see what you find out about your chart by taking a look at this and incorporating this delicious piece of astrology juiciness into what you already know or are learning. All right, guys, like this video, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Love you guys.